November 1945. The war in Europe had ended 6 months ago, but for Sergeant James Mitchell, the journey home felt longer than the 3 years he'd spent fighting across France and Germany. The train from New York to his hometown of Cedar Falls, Iowa, moved slowly through the autumn landscape, each mile bringing him closer to the moment he'd dreamed about every night in the frozen trenches of Belgium. The moment he would see Catherine again. His Catherine, the woman who had promised to wait for him, the woman whose letters had kept him alive through the darkest days of the Battle of the Bulge. In his pocket, wrapped carefully in waterproof canvas, was the wedding ring he'd carried through every battle. Sterling silver with a small diamond, nothing fancy. He'd bought it with his last paycheck before shipping out in 1942, 3 weeks before their planned wedding. "Keep it safe for me," Catherine had whispered that last night on her parents' porch, her green eyes filled with tears. "When you come back, you'll put it on my finger, and we'll never be apart again." He'd kissed her, tasting the salt of her tears, and made a promise he'd fought like hell to keep. He'd come home. He'd survived. The train pulled into Cedar Falls Station at 4 in the afternoon. James stepped onto the platform, his duffel bag over his shoulder, his heart pounding so hard he could barely breathe. The station was nearly empty. He'd sent a telegram 3 days ago telling his family he was coming, but he hadn't told them exactly when. He wanted to surprise Catherine, to show up at her door, to see her face light up with joy, to finally make her his wife. He walked the familiar streets of his hometown, noticing how little had changed. The same brick buildings, the same corner store where he'd bought Catherine chocolate sodas, the same church where they'd planned to marry. Everything was the same, but James felt different. 3 years of war had aged him in ways that had nothing to do with time. He'd seen things, done things, lost friends whose faces still haunted his dreams, but Catherine's love had been his anchor. Her letters had reminded him who he was beneath the uniform and the killing. He turned onto Maple Street, where Catherine's family lived. The white 2-story house with blue shutters looked exactly as he remembered. The oak tree where he'd carved their initials was still there, the C+J inside a heart now grown thick with bark. His hands were shaking as he walked up the front path. This was it, the moment he'd survived for. He knocked on the door. Catherine's mother, Mrs. Eleanor Hayes, opened it. Her face went white. "James," she whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh God, James." Something in her voice made his stomach drop. Not joy, not relief, something else, fear maybe, or sorrow. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, trying to smile. "I'm home. I came to see Catherine." "Is she here?" Eleanor Hayes's eyes filled with tears. "James, you need to come inside. There's something we need to tell you." The telegram that changed everything. James sat in the Hayes' living room, a cup of untouched coffee growing cold in his hands, while Eleanor Hayes told him a story that shattered his world. In February 1944, Catherine had received a telegram. It was from the War Department. It stated that Sergeant James Mitchell was missing in action, presumed killed during combat operations in Belgium. There had been an explosion during the Battle of the Bulge. Several men from his unit had been killed. James's dog tags had been found in the debris. The army had concluded he was dead. "She didn't believe it at first," Eleanor said, tears streaming down her face. She refused to accept it. She kept waiting for another telegram, a correction, anything. But months passed and there was nothing. The army sent his personal effects, his watch, his wallet, even a letter he'd written to her that never got sent. "Everything pointed to you being gone, James. We all believed it. We had to." James felt like he was drowning. "But I wasn't dead. I was in a German POW camp. My tags had been stolen by another soldier who died in that explosion. When the camp was liberated in April 45, I sent word immediately. Didn't you get my letters?" Eleanor shook her head. "Nothing, James. We received nothing until your telegram 3 days ago. That was the first we'd heard that you were alive." The silence in the room was suffocating. James knew what was coming. He could see it in Eleanor's eyes, in the way she couldn't quite look at him. "Where is Catherine?" he asked quietly. Eleanor Hayes took a shaky breath. "She's married, James. She married Robert Patterson 6 months ago. She's living in Des Moines now. She's 3 months pregnant." The room tilted. James gripped the armrest of the chair, trying to steady himself. Robert Patterson, his childhood best friend, the man he'd grown up with, the man who'd stood beside him at the recruitment office but had been rejected for flat feet, the man he'd trusted to look after Catherine while he was gone. Robert. The word came out as barely a whisper. Eleanor nodded miserably. He was here for her, James. After the telegram came, she was devastated, completely broken. Robert helped the family, checked on us, made sure we had what we needed. He and Catherine spent a lot of time together. They were both grieving you, and over time it became something else. James stood up abruptly. I need to see her. I need to talk to her. James, I don't know if that's a good idea. She's built a new life. She's going to have a baby. Robert is her husband now. I don't care. The words came out harsher than he intended. He lowered his voice. I'm sorry, Mrs. Hayes, but I carried her memory through hell. Her letters were the only thing that kept me human. I survived because I was coming back to her. I have to see her. I have to hear it from her. The confrontation. 2 days later, James stood outside a modest house in a quiet Des Moines neighborhood. His hands were trembling. The wedding ring was still in his pocket, a weight that felt heavier with every passing moment. He'd barely slept since learning the truth. Part of him wanted to turn around to leave and never come back. But he needed to see her. He needed to understand how the woman who'd promised to love him forever had married his best friend 16 months after believing him dead. He knocked. Footsteps. The door opened, and there she was. Catherine. Her dark hair was longer now, pulled back in a simple bun. She was wearing a green dress that couldn't quite hide the small swell of her pregnancy. She looked older, more tired, but she was still the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. Her green eyes went wide. The color drained from her face. James? Her voice broke on his name. You're alive. You're really alive. Hello, Catherine. They stared at each other. 3 years of separation. 3 years of letters and promises and dreams, all of it hanging between them like smoke. Can I come in? James asked. Catherine nodded numbly and stepped aside. The house was small but tidy. There were photographs on the mantel. Catherine and Robert on their wedding day. Catherine smiling, though the smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Robert looking proud, his arm around her waist. James felt sick looking at it. Robert's at work, Catherine said quietly. He won't be home for another 2 hours. She led him to the living room. They sat across from each other, an impossible distance of 5 feet that might as well have been an ocean. Your mother told me about the telegram, James said. About the army saying I was dead. Catherine nodded, her eyes already filling with tears. It destroyed me, James. When that telegram came, I wanted to die too. For weeks, I could barely get out of bed. I kept expecting you to walk through the door and tell me it was all a mistake. It was a mistake. I was alive. I was in a POW camp, but I was alive. I didn't know that. Catherine's voice rose, anguished. How could I have known? The army said you were dead. They sent your things. Your watch still had your blood on it. What was I supposed to think? James pulled the wedding ring from his pocket and set it on the coffee table between them. Catherine gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. You kept it, she whispered. Through everything. Through every battle, every prison camp, every moment I thought I might not make it. I kept it because I was coming home to you. Because you promised to wait. I did wait. Tears were streaming down Catherine's face now. I waited for over a year, James. I grieved you. I mourned you. And I was so alone. My parents were struggling. Money was tight. I'd had to quit my teaching job because I was so depressed I couldn't function. And Robert was there. He'd lost you too, his best friend. We were both broken, and somehow being together made the pain a little more bearable. So you fell in love with him. It wasn't a question. Catherine wiped her eyes. I don't know if it was love at first. It was survival. It was two people trying to hold each other up when everything had fallen apart. He proposed in March 1945, said he'd loved me for years, but never said anything because of you. Said you would have wanted him to take care of me. And I thought maybe he was right. You were gone. I was never going to see you again. Maybe I could build something with Robert. Maybe I could be happy again. Are you? James asked. Are you happy? Catherine looked at him for a long moment. I'm trying to be. That's not an answer. She stood up, wrapping her arms around herself. What do you want me to say, James? That I don't love him? That I made a mistake? I'm carrying his child. We're married. This is my life now. It was supposed to be our life. James was on his feet too now, 3 years of pain and anger finally breaking through. We were supposed to get married. We were supposed to have children. We were supposed to grow old together. I survived a war for you, Catherine. I survived hell because I knew you were waiting. I was waiting, Catherine shouted back. But you died, or so I thought. What was I supposed to do, James? Wait forever for a ghost? Put my life on hold for a man who was never coming back? The silence that followed was deafening. They stood there, both breathing hard, both crying. Finally, Catherine spoke, her voice barely a whisper. I never stopped loving you, even after the telegram, even after I married Robert. There's a part of my heart that will always be yours. But that doesn't change reality. I'm Robert's wife now. I'm going to be the mother of his child. And you need to let me go. The impossible choice. That night, James met Robert Patterson at a bar downtown. Robert had called him after Catherine told him about the visit. We need to talk, Robert had said, his voice strained. Man to man. The bar was quiet, just a handful of regulars and a tired bartender. James and Robert sat in a booth in the back, 2 glasses of whiskey between them. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, Robert broke the silence. I thought you were dead, James. I swear to God I thought you were dead. I never would have. If I'd known you were alive, I never would have pursued Catherine. But you did pursue her. James's voice was flat. My best friend married the woman I loved, the woman who promised to wait for me. She thought you were dead. Robert's voice cracked. We both did. Do you know what that did to her? To get that telegram? She was shattered, James, completely destroyed. I watched the woman I'd secretly loved since high school fall apart, and I couldn't do anything to fix it. But I could be there. I could help. And over time, it became more. You were in love with her? James asked. While I was overseas fighting, you were in love with my fiancée. Robert didn't flinch from the accusation. Yes, I was. I'd been in love with her since we were 16. But you asked her out first and she chose you, so I buried it. I stepped back. I watched you two together and I was happy for you, even though it killed me inside. When you left for the war, I promised you I'd look after her. And I did. But I never expected to fall even deeper in love with her. I never expected her to fall in love with me, too. Does she love you? James had to know. Or did she settle for you because she thought she couldn't have me? Robert took a long drink of his whiskey. I ask myself that every day. Some days I think she loves me, really loves me. Other days I think I'm just a stand-in for you. A way for her to have the life she planned, just with a different man in your place. But I love her enough that I'll take whatever she can give me. James stared at his old friend. Robert looked older too, lines around his eyes, grey already starting at his temples. The war had aged everyone, even those who'd stayed home. She's pregnant with your child, James said. Robert nodded. I know. And I know what you're thinking, that I took advantage of her grief, that I swooped in when she was vulnerable. Maybe there's truth to that, but I've been good to her, James. I've given her a home. I've tried to make her happy. I'd die for her the same as you would have. Would have, James repeated bitterly, like I'm already dead. Aren't you? Robert's question hung in the air. The James Mitchell that Catherine knew died in Belgium. The man who came back is someone else, someone who's seen and done things that changed him. Even if she left me and came back to you, could you two really go back to what you had? Could you pretend the last 3 years didn't happen? James wanted to argue, but he couldn't. Because Robert was right. He wasn't the same man who'd left for war. He had nightmares. He drank too much. He startled at loud noises. He'd killed men, some of them up close enough to see their faces. How could he bring that darkness into Catherine's life? How could he be the husband she'd dreamed of when he could barely sleep through the night? What do we do? James asked finally. I don't know, Robert admitted. Part of me wants to tell you to stay away from her, to let us build our life and never come back. But another part knows that's not fair to Catherine. She deserves to choose. She deserves to know you're alive and to decide what she wants. And if she chooses me? Robert's jaw clenched. Then I'll step aside. Because I love her enough to want her to be happy, even if it's not with me. But James, Think about what you'd be asking her to do. She'd be leaving her husband, raising another man's child while married to you. The scandal would destroy her reputation. Her family would be devastated, and for what? To reclaim a dream that died 3 years ago? The letter. 3 weeks later, Catherine received a letter. It was in James's handwriting, the same careful script she'd memorized from dozens of wartime letters. She opened it with shaking hands. "Dear Catherine, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. I'm leaving Cedar Falls, leaving Iowa, maybe leaving the country. I don't know yet. All I know is that I can't stay here and watch you live a life that was supposed to be ours. I need you to understand something. I love you. I have always loved you, and I will love you until the day I die. You were the light that guided me through the darkest moments of my life. The thought of coming home to you is the only reason I survived. But loving you means wanting you to be happy, even if that happiness doesn't include me. I've had 3 weeks to think about everything, to imagine what it would mean if you left Robert and came back to me. The scandal, the judgment, the pain it would cause your family, the child you're carrying, who would grow up knowing their mother left their father for another man. I can't do that to you, I won't. You deserve better than a life built on other people's suffering. Robert loves you. I can see it in the way he looks at you, the way he talks about you. He'll be a good husband, a good father. He'll give you the stable, peaceful life you deserve. The life I can't give you, not anymore. The war changed me, Catherine. I wish it hadn't, but it did. I have nightmares. I wake up screaming. I see the faces of the men I killed. I hear the screams of my friends as they died. I'm not the man you fell in love with. That man died in Belgium, just like the telegram said. The man who survived is someone else, someone broken, someone who doesn't know how to live in peacetime. You deserve someone whole, someone who can give you the life you always dreamed of. I'm keeping the wedding ring, not because I'm holding on to hope, but because I want to remember what love felt like before the war. Pure, simple, untouched by death and loss. I'll carry it with me wherever I go, a reminder of what could have been in another life. Be happy, Catherine. Love your husband, love your child, live the life you were meant to live. And sometimes when you're old and grey and your grandchildren ask about the war, maybe you'll tell them about a soldier who loved you enough to let you go. I'll always love you. Always. But sometimes love means walking away. Yours, James. Catherine read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Her hands instinctively went to her belly, where her baby was growing. Robert found her an hour later, still holding the letter, still crying. He read it over her shoulder, and when he was done, he wrapped his arms around his wife and held her, while she grieved for the man who'd loved her enough to disappear. The wedding ring. He never wore. 23 years later, in 1968, a package arrived at Catherine Patterson's house in Des Moines. There was no return address, but the postmark was from Seattle. Inside was a small wooden box. Catherine opened it with trembling hands and found a silver wedding ring with a small diamond. Wrapped around it was a note in James's handwriting. "Catherine, I'm dying, cancer. The doctors give me a few months at most. I never married, never had children, never loved anyone else. I spent the last 23 years working as a carpenter in Seattle, living quietly, trying to build a life from the ruins of my war. I want you to have this ring, not because I regret letting you go, but because you should know that my love for you never wavered. Not for a single day. I hope you've been happy. I hope Robert gave you everything you deserved. I hope your child grew up healthy and strong. I hope when you're old, you'll look at your life and feel satisfied with the choices you made. I made my choice in 1945. I chose your happiness over mine. I chose to carry my love for you silently, privately, rather than burden you with it. It was the hardest thing I ever did, harder than any battle I fought, but it was the right thing. I don't regret it. Tell Robert he's a lucky man. Tell your child they have a mother who was worth fighting for, worth surviving for, worth walking away from. And sometimes, when you look at this ring, remember the boy who bought it in 1942, full of hope and dreams and love. Remember that once before the world went dark, someone loved you with everything he had. Goodbye, Catherine. Thank you for being my light, James." Catherine sat in her living room, holding the ring, tears falling onto the silver metal. Her daughter, Margaret, 23 years old now, found her there. "Mum, what's wrong?" Catherine looked at her daughter, this beautiful young woman who looked so much like Robert. "I need to tell you a story," she said quietly, "about a soldier who loved me enough to walk away, about a wedding ring that was never worn, about the man who could have been your father, but chose to let you have the father you deserved instead." That night, Catherine told Margaret everything. About James Mitchell, about their love, about the telegram that changed everything, about the impossible choice she'd faced, and about the man who'd made that choice for her, sacrificing his own happiness to preserve hers. When she was done, Margaret was crying too. "Did you love him, Mum? More than Dad?" Catherine thought about it carefully. "I loved them differently. I loved James with the passion and innocence of first love, the kind of love that exists before the world teaches you how complicated everything is. But I loved your father with gratitude and respect and genuine affection. He built a life with me. He raised you and your brothers. He was there for every moment, good and bad. That's love too. Maybe not the fairy tale kind, but real and lasting nonetheless. Do you regret it? Staying with Dad?" Catherine shook her head. "No, because choosing James would have meant destroying so many lives. Your father's. Yours because you wouldn't have been born. My family's reputation. James understood that. He loved me enough to see the bigger picture and walk away. That's real love, Margaret. Not the dramatic, passionate kind you see in movies, but the quiet, selfless kind that puts someone else's happiness above your own." Margaret picked up the wedding ring, turning it over in her fingers. "What are you going to do with it?" Catherine smiled sadly. "I'm going to keep it, to remember him, to honor his sacrifice, and someday when I'm gone, I want you to have it. I want you to tell your children about James Mitchell, about the soldier who survived a war but couldn't survive peace, about a love that was strong enough to let go, about a wedding ring that was never worn but meant more than any ring that was." Epilogue. Catherine Patterson died in 1996, 51 years after James Mitchell walked out of her life. She was buried next to Robert, who had passed away in 1983. Her obituary mentioned her 3 children, 7 grandchildren, and her long career as a teacher. It didn't mention James Mitchell, but in her jewelry box, carefully wrapped in the same waterproof canvas James had carried through the war, was a silver wedding ring with a small diamond. And tucked inside the ring was a tiny folded piece of paper with James's final words, "Thank you for being my light." Margaret kept the ring, as her mother had asked. She told the story to her own children, and they told it to theirs. The tale of the soldier who loved his fiancée enough to let her go. The man who carried a wedding ring through hell and back, only to give it away unused. The love that was strong enough to survive war, but too selfless to survive peace. In 2015, 70 years after the end of World War II, Margaret's granddaughter, a history major at the University of Iowa, wrote her senior thesis about James Mitchell. Through military records, she tracked down his story. He'd died in Seattle in 1968, just as his note had predicted. He'd never married. He'd lived alone in a small apartment above his carpentry shop. He had no children, no close friends. He'd attended veterans' meetings occasionally, but always left early, uncomfortable with the camaraderie he could never quite connect with. But he'd left behind something unexpected, a storage unit full of letters, hundreds of them. Letters to Catherine that he'd written but never sent. Letters describing his life in Seattle, his work, his loneliness, his enduring love. Letters written on her birthday, on their would-be anniversary, on the anniversaries of the day they'd met and the day he'd walked away. Every letter ended the same way. "I'm still carrying the ring. I'm still loving you. I'm still letting you go." The granddaughter published excerpts from the letters as part of her thesis. The story went viral. News outlets picked it up. People cried reading James's words. They debated whether he'd been noble or foolish, whether Catherine should have left Robert, whether love conquered all, or whether sometimes walking away was the most loving thing you could do. But everyone agreed on one thing. James Mitchell had loved Catherine Hayes with a purity and selflessness that was rare in any era. He'd sacrificed his own happiness for hers without hesitation, without resentment, without expectation of recognition or reward. He'd carried his love silently for 23 years and died alone, clutching a wedding ring he'd never gotten to place on her finger. In 2016, a memorial was placed in Cedar Falls, Iowa, honoring the soldiers of World War II who'd returned home broken. James Mitchell's name was engraved on it, along with hundreds of others. Veterans who'd survived the war but couldn't survive peace. Soldiers who'd come home to find their lives changed irrevocably. Men who'd loved and lost and carried their pain quietly until the end. And next to James's name, someone had placed a small silver wedding ring, not the original one. That remained with Catherine's family, a sacred relic of an impossible love, but a replica, a symbol, a reminder that sometimes the greatest acts of love are the ones that require letting go. That sometimes the wedding rings that mean the most are the ones that are never worn. The end. This is the story of James Mitchell and Catherine Hayes, of a love that survived war but couldn't survive the choices war forced upon them, of a wedding ring carried through hell but never placed on the hand it was meant for, of a soldier who learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is not to fight, but to surrender. To let go of the person you love most in the world, because loving them means wanting them to be happy, even if that happiness doesn't include you. James Mitchell died in 1968 at the age of 46. He was buried in a veterans cemetery in Seattle. On his headstone, alongside his name and military service, was a single line he'd requested in his will. He carried her memory home. And in his casket, clutched in his hands, was a silver wedding ring with a small diamond. The wedding ring he never wore, the symbol of the love he never stopped carrying. The reminder that some promises are kept not through staying, but through having the strength to walk away. This is a love story, but not the kind you usually hear. It's a story about sacrifice and selflessness and the quiet courage it takes to put someone else's happiness before your own. It's a story about a man who loved a woman so much that he disappeared from her life to let her live it fully. It's a story about a wedding ring that was never worn, but meant more than any ring ever could, because it represented not what was, but what could have been. Not the life they lived, but the life they sacrificed. Not the promise that was kept, but the dream that was let go. And in the end, isn't that what real love is? Not holding on at any cost, but knowing when to let go. Not possessing someone, but setting them free. Not demanding that they choose you, but giving them the space to choose themselves. James Mitchell understood that, and though it cost him everything, he never regretted it, because he'd loved Catherine Hayes, truly loved her. And true love means wanting them to be happy, even if it breaks your heart, even if it costs you your future, even if you spend the rest of your life alone, carrying a wedding ring you'll never get to use, loving a woman you'll never get to hold again. This is the story of the wedding ring he never wore, but it's really the story of the love he never stopped carrying, until the very end.